Now let's talk about some different types of sampling methods. There are many different ways to sample, and we're actually only going to talk about a small number of sampling strategies in STAT 1350. But we hope that you'll come to appreciate the fact that there are different ways that you can sample, and some are better than others. So we want you to understand why some are better than others. So first let's talk about the convenience sample. So as the name implies, we're selecting whichever individuals are easiest to reach. So if you're in a large lecture hall and we ask you to take a sample, maybe it's easiest to reach the students who are sitting right near you. If you have to conduct some sort of survey of college students, it might be easiest for you to go to the student union one day, or go to the library, or take a sample of students from one of your classes, or post a survey question on Facebook and let your friends respond to that. That would actually be a certain type of convenient sample known as voluntary response, which we'll talk about shortly. But here's kind of a diagram of what this might look like. So over here we have our population, and then over here is this subset. And notice that the subset comes from here. So again, maybe you're in a lecture hall and you decide you're going to just talk to the people who are sitting around you. You're all sitting in the back. Well, people sitting in the front might be a little bit different. So notice that each of these people is a different color. And so imagine that the colors refer to some particular characteristic of the population. So by taking a convenience sample, we might not be getting the best representation of the population. And that can be problematic if we're trying to say something about the population. What we end up saying might not be valid because we don't have a good representation of that bigger group. So again, one type of convenience sample is known as the voluntary response sample. So this is where people choose themselves by responding to a general appeal. So this is why I said if you put a question on Facebook and you throw a question out there, people are going to choose for themselves whether they want to respond to that or not. So they're volunteering to respond to your sample. We see this a lot with radio stations who will have people call in and give their opinions about something. Or certain websites will put a link to a poll and people will decide for themselves if they want to give their opinions or they want to answer a question. Hopefully you're already thinking about why this can be a problem. It can be problematic because the people who are making the decision or taking the time to respond might be different from people who are not taking the time to respond. It's been shown that people with especially negative opinions might be more likely to respond to these appeals, to call in or to log in or to give their thoughts and ideas about something. And so if you're then wanting to try to make an inference about the population, you need to be very cautious about that. You need to think about whether the inference is going to be valid. Sometimes, even though there are problems with this technique or this type of sampling method, sometimes it's the only ethical choice for experiments using people. So when I was a student, I was a psychology major, I had to conduct experiments for some of my classes. I had to put up a flyer on a bulletin board, and people could walk by and decide if they were going to participate in my study or not. Students who took the introductory psychology course had to take part in a certain number of experiments. That was part of their grade. So they were motivated to get a good grade by participating in experiments, and they would decide for themselves if they wanted to be in my experiment or not. So a lot of experiments do use voluntary response samples, and that's okay. We can still try to make an inference to the population, but we just need to be cautious. We need to make sure that we let our audience know that this may not be a representative sample of the population. And for that reason, you need to be, the inferences that we're drawing might not really be accurate, might not be as accurate as they can be. So you need to be aware of that as you're trying to make sense of the findings. Okay, so what type of sample do we want? Ideally, we want a simple random sample, and we want you to have an understanding of what it means when we say we have a simple random sample. So a simple random sample is where we're allowing impersonal chance to do the choosing, and I'll give some examples of that in a moment. But in a simple random sample, every individual in the population has an equal chance of being included in the sample. And so this is what that would look like. So we imagine, for instance, that we have a well-defined population where we can maybe number all the individuals in the population. And then from that population, every single individual has an equal chance of being chosen, and we use some sort of random mechanism to do the choosing. So here, if I had a relatively small population, I could number each person. I could put all those numbers in a hat. I could mix up the hat, or mix up the numbers in the hat and just randomly select the numbers that are going to be in my sample. If we have a much bigger population where it would be very hard to write all these numbers down and put them in a hat, we might use computer technology to help us choose a random sample of numbers. You can see, however, that even though this is the ideal, it would be really hard to do. You'd have to have access to that whole population. You'd have to sample in a way so that every single individual has an equal chance of being part of the sample. So in reality, it's very, very challenging to get a simple random sample. We want to try to do that. We strive to do that when we can, but it can be very challenging. If you're able to do that, however, that's the best, because then you can be more confident that the sample you end up with is a good representation of the population, or is a much better representation of the population than, say, a voluntary response sample or a convenience sample. There are different types of random sampling methods. So the simple random sample is what you're learning about in Chapter 2. And again, we'd start with a list of the whole population. We'd use some sort of random method to select n of those individuals. So n is our sample size. So you're going to see n a lot moving forward. And every individual has an equal chance of being chosen. We can contrast this with what's called a stratified random sample. So you're going to read more about that when you get into Chapter 4. The idea with stratification is that you first divide your population into groups of individuals based on some characteristic. So each group is of individuals who are similar based on some characteristic. And then what you do is you take a simple random sample from each of those groups. And then you combine all of the samples that you take into one really big group, or one big sample. So think about how we could take a stratified random sample in STAT 1350. How could we divide the class into groups of similar individuals and then take a random sample, or a simple random sample, from each of those groups? It might make sense to group people based on what year they are in college: first-year students, sophomores, juniors, seniors. Maybe I want an overall sample that's going to include people from each of those classes. So that might be my reason for choosing a stratified method. Oftentimes you'll choose this method if you want to ensure that the sample includes some representation of different groups within the bigger population. Maybe I decide I'm going to stratify based on major. So I have all these different majors, and from each major I'm going to take a simple random sample. So again, we'll see more examples of this coming up, but we want you to know that even within random sampling, there are different methods you could use. So I want to kind of pause here and play a little game. So based on what you've learned so far about different sampling methods, I want you to see if you can identify what type of sample or type of sampling method we are using in a couple of examples here. So here's my first example. So let's say I'm purchasing a crate of oranges. I want to make sure the oranges I'm buying are good, so I will choose a few oranges from the top of each crate to inspect. If the ones I select are good, I will buy the crate. So what type of sampling method is this? Okay, so I'm hoping you're saying this is a convenience sample. It's very convenient for me just to pick oranges off the top of each crate. I can easily see them. I don't have to dig into the crates to pull out things from different parts of each crate. This is most convenient for me. But of course, there can be problems. It could be that the worst oranges fall down to the bottom of the crate, or the oranges on top somehow damage the ones on the bottom. So this might not really give me the best idea of the oranges as a whole and how good they are, and whether I should be selling these to customers. Okay, let's try another quick one, and then we'll wrap up this part of our video. Let's say I want to estimate the percentage of students in a lecture hall who like football. To do this, I will go around the room and ask every 8th person to tell me if they like football or not. Okay, so what kind of sampling method would this be? And then have we talked about this type of method? Maybe you're thinking, well, could this be a simple random sample? The fact that I'm looking at every 8th person means that not every person in the lecture hall, if we think of the lecture hall as being our population, all the students in the lecture hall as being the population, and if we're only looking at every 8th person, then every single person in that lecture hall does not have an equal chance of being chosen to be in the sample. You're only going to be chosen if you're sitting in every 8th seat. So that's actually a different kind of sampling method, which is called a systematic sample. So a systematic sample is where you order the individuals in the population and then select every nth individual to be in the sample. So I wanted to share this particular sampling method because in a way it's kind of like a convenience method, but it's a method you're using to try to be a little bit more representative. So rather than just focusing on people in one section of the lecture hall, I'm trying to get a representation of all parts of the lecture hall. Again, not every person is having an equal chance of being part of my survey. It's possible that people are sitting in a particular order. If we don't think people would be sitting in a particular order, then this might be a good method to use to try to get a good representation, and it's a quick and easy method that's often used in sampling. And again, this is just a quick diagram to show what this looks like. So if you're using some kind of scheme where you're taking every 10th person or every 8th person or every 3rd person, etc., you are using what's called a systematic sample. It's not a purely random sample, but it can be better than just a regular convenient sample. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up here, and then we're going to have one more quick video for Chapter 2.